The first thing that struck me about Salem wasn't the silence, nor the thick wall of trees that encased the town like a fortress. It was the people. Their skin, raw and inflamed, like they'd spent days clawing at themselves, was a grotesque shade of red. Not sunburnt, not allergic, just wrong. At first, I assumed it was some kind of regional outbreak, maybe a reaction to local pollen or a water contamination issue. But as the days passed, the unease burrowed deeper under my skin. It wasn't just the redness, it was the way they moved, the way their fingers constantly scratched their nails, digging and scraping, as if something beneath their flesh begged to be freed. And the worst part? No one spoke about it. As if it was normal, as if it had always been this way. I had come to Salem for work, a temporary transfer for a regional infrastructure project. A sleepy little town in the heart of nowhere, where the roads cracked under the weight of time, and the houses leaned against one another like tired old men. The job paid well enough, and I didn't mind the solitude. I figured it'd be a quiet stint, maybe even a little peaceful. But something about the town felt off. The air was thick with an odd humidity, even though the temperature wasn't particularly high. The trees seemed to loom closer than they should, their branches gnarled like twisted fingers. The first few days passed uneventfully, but there was a lingering sense of being watched, as though the town itself was sizing me up. Then, on the third night, I heard the scratching. It wasn't just the wind against my motel window or the sound of tree branches scraping rooftops. It was human. At first it was faint, an occasional noise that could have been mistaken for someone shifting in bed, restless. But as the hours crept by, it became relentless, rhythmic, like nails dragging across wood over and over. By the fourth night, the scratching was louder. I peeked outside around midnight and saw my neighbor, a man in his 40s, standing in his doorway, clawing at his forearms. His head was tilted back, mouth slightly open, eyes vacant. I swear for a moment he wasn't breathing. I wanted to tell myself it was just a nervous habit, some collective tic the town had developed. But the next morning, I saw him at the diner, sipping his coffee like nothing had happened. His arms were covered in fresh scratches, deep enough to bleed. "What's going on with everybody's skin around here?" I asked the waitress as she poured my coffee. She paused just for a fraction of a second. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Dry air," she said. That was a lie. The more I observed, the more unsettled I became. The scratching was constant. At work, in stores, at the gas station, everywhere I went, people dug their nails into their flesh, absently tearing at themselves as if they didn't even notice. The tension in the air was palpable, an unspoken understanding that whatever was happening wasn't meant to be questioned. And then, one evening, I noticed something else. The trees surrounding the town. They had scars. Long, jagged grooves running along their bark, as if something or someone had been clawing at them too. That night I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my mind, to shake the feeling of suffocation that had settled in my chest since arriving. The streets were eerily quiet except for the distant rustling of leaves. As I passed the town square, I noticed an old man sitting on a bench, his fingers moving absently over his arms. His nails were long, jagged, and coated in something dark. "You shouldn't be out this late," he murmured without looking up. I hesitated. "Why not?" His fingers dug deeper into his skin. He let out a dry chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Because that's when they come." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Who?" This time he did look at me, and his eyes, clouded, haunted, held something ancient and knowing. "You'll see soon enough." Before I could press for more, he stood up and shuffled away into the darkness, leaving me alone with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the creeping sense that I had just crossed an invisible threshold into something far worse than I had imagined. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the echo of his words. "That's when they come." I kept the motel room's lamp on and listened. The town was quiet, but not in the peaceful way I had expected. It was the kind of silence that felt unnatural, heavy, waiting to be broken. And then, sometime past 3 in the morning, I heard it. Not scratching. Something else. A sound low and guttural, almost like a distant growl carried by the wind. It didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was deep, resonant, and filled with something hungry. I sat up in bed, straining my ears. The sound came again, closer this time. I moved to the window and pushed the curtains aside just enough to peek outside. The street was empty. No cars, no people, just the flickering glow of an old street lamp casting jagged shadows along the pavement. And then, without warning, the power cut out. My room was swallowed in darkness. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Outside, the entire street had gone dark as well. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. Just silence. Then, movement. At the far end of the street, beyond the glow of the dying street lamp, a figure stood. Tall, eerily thin. Its limbs too long, its stance unnatural. But what made my stomach churn was its eyes, huge black pits that swallowed what little light remained, fixed on me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure didn't come closer. It just watched. And then, after what felt like an eternity, it tilted its head, just slightly, before vanishing into the shadows. I bolted from my room, my breath coming in short gasps. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could explain what the hell was going on. I pounded on the door of the motel's front office, desperate. No answer. I turned, the feeling of those eyes still burning into my skull. The sensation was faint at first, like the brush of a spider's leg against the inside of my forearm. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just my nerves, the stress of the night playing tricks on me. But as I sat there, back pressed against the motel door, the feeling grew stronger. It wasn't just a tickle anymore. It was a deliberate, insistent movement, as if something were burrowing its way through my flesh. I scrambled to my feet, my hands frantically clawing at my arms, my legs, my chest. My skin felt hot, inflamed, and as I looked down, I saw the same raw redness that had plagued the townspeople. My nails dug into my arms, leaving angry red welts, but the itching only intensified. It wasn't on the surface, it was deeper. Something was inside me. I stumbled to the bathroom, flicking on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed weakly, casting a sickly glow over the small space. I tore off my shirt, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My skin was mottled, patches of crimson spreading like wildfire. And then I saw it, a faint ripple beneath the surface, like a worm moving just under the skin. I gagged, my stomach churning. "No, no, no," I whispered, my voice trembling. I grabbed a pair of tweezers from the sink drawer, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them. I pressed the tip against my arm where the movement was most pronounced and dug in. The pain was sharp, immediate, but I didn't care. I had to get it out. Blood welled up as I pried the skin open, my vision blurring with tears. And then I saw it, a thin black tendril, no thicker than a thread, wriggling in the wound. I dropped the tweezers, stumbling back against the wall. The tendril retracted, disappearing back into my flesh as if it had never been there. But the itching didn't stop. If anything, it grew worse, spreading to my legs, my torso, my neck. I collapsed to the floor, my body convulsing as the sensation overtook me. It wasn't just itching anymore. It was a burning, a searing heat that felt like my blood was boiling. I clawed at my skin, desperate for relief, but nothing helped. And then, as I lay there writhing in agony, I heard it, a voice. Not from outside the room, but from inside my head. "You belong to us." The voice was guttural, ancient, filled with a malice that made my blood run cold. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. It was the voice of the things in the woods, the things the town had been feeding, and now they were inside me. I don't know how long I lay there, trapped in that waking nightmare. Time lost all meaning as the voice whispered to me, its words a jumble of threats and promises. It spoke of the town's history, of the pact its founders had made centuries ago to keep the creatures at bay. It spoke of the sacrifices, the blood, the flesh. And it spoke of me, how I had been chosen, marked the moment I set foot in Salem. When I finally regained some semblance of control, the sun was rising, its weak light filtering through the motel's thin curtains. My body ached, my skin raw and bleeding from where I had scratched it. But the itching had subsided, replaced by a dull, throbbing pain. I dragged myself to the bed, my mind reeling. The first thing I did was pack my bags, and then I felt it again, the faint movement beneath my skin. I froze, my hands trembling. The voice returned, low and mocking. "You're one of us now." I shook my head, trying to drown it out. But deep down, I knew it was true. The town had claimed me, just as it had claimed everyone else, and there was no escaping it. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to leave, but every time I got in my car, the engine wouldn't start. I tried to call for help, but the phone lines were dead. The townspeople watched me with knowing eyes, their expressions a mix of pity and resignation. They didn't try to stop me, but they didn't help me either. They knew it was pointless. The scratching returned, worse than before. I could feel the tendrils moving inside me, spreading, growing. My skin was a patchwork of scars and fresh wounds, my nails caked with blood. I stopped sleeping, afraid of what I might see in my dreams. The voice in my head grew louder, more insistent, until it was all I could hear. And then, one night, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, when I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I doubled over, gasping for air, as something tore through my skin. I looked down, my vision swimming, and saw it, a black, writhing mass erupting from my chest. It wasn't just one tendril anymore. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, twisting and coiling like a nest of snakes. I screamed, but no sound came out. The tendrils wrapped around me, pulling me to the floor. I could feel them burrowing into my flesh, merging with me, becoming a part of me. The voice in my head was deafening now, a cacophony of laughter and whispers. "You are ours. You always were." And then, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted and gnarled. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the ground soft and spongy beneath my feet. I tried to move, but my body didn't respond. I was no longer in control. I could feel them, the creatures, moving through me, using me like a puppet. My limbs jerked unnaturally as I walked, my head lolling to the side. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I couldn't. I was a prisoner in my own body. The woods were alive with movement. Shadows flitted between the trees, their shapes indistinct but unmistakably inhuman. I could hear them whispering, their voices a blend of guttural growls and high-pitched shrieks. They were everywhere, watching, waiting, and then I saw a clearing, bathed in an eerie greenish light. In the center stood a massive tree, its trunk twisted and scarred. The tendrils that had erupted from my body stretched toward it, connecting me to the tree like a puppet on strings. This was the heart of it all. The source of the town's curse, and now it had claimed me too. As I stood there, helpless, I realized the truth. The townspeople hadn't just been feeding the creatures. They had been feeding the tree. It was alive, a monstrous entity that had been growing for centuries, sustained by the blood and flesh of the sacrifices. And now it had a new host. The voice in my head spoke one last time, its tone final. "Welcome home." And then the tendrils pulled me into the tree. I was gone.